Well, hello and welcome. I'm John Hale, the Strategy Guy. In this program, I interview interesting people that are helping to create a brighter future. My special guest today is Rob Breuer, co-founder and CEO of Solar Schools, who will share how we can take meaningful steps with climate action. Welcome, Rob.
G'day.
How are you?
I'm sensational because I just found out I'm interesting.
You are interesting. I've always found you interesting. This is why you're here. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing with Solar Schools to create a brighter future.
So the best way I describe myself is the unreasonable man. I've been an adventurer. I've managed to go rock climbing, scuba diving, mountaineering, bike riding all over the planet. And in that journey, I've actually seen our environment change over the last 30 years. So we decided to take a bit of action on that with Solar Schools to teach schools about their energy consumption and its impact on our environment. And we've now recently just started a not-for-profit called Zero Positive for Schools. And the goal of that is to get all 9,500 schools in Australia to net zero.
That's a big, audacious sort of goal to try and reach.
So it's only just started, so we've got a long way to go, and we're looking at our launching early next year. We're just looking for our foundation school partners now, but it's looking pretty good.
All right, excellent. That sounds great. So what I wanted to do for our listeners today is talk a little bit about why there's a problem with the planet. And I guess the first question really is about CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. Is that the real problem that we're dealing with here, or are there other issues?
It's probably the major issue. There are other issues, but CO2, as we would have seen in the news, it's actually gone from a safe margin of 280 to 350 parts per million up to about 416 parts per million at last check. And being a greenhouse gas, it's got warming potential. So basically it traps reflected heat from escaping from our environment. And the more that it does that, the more obviously the planet warms, and the more CO2 we put in the atmosphere, the more natural processes we need to take it back out of the atmosphere. And at the moment, we're well out of balance with that. We're emitting more than we can absorb. And the downside of that is one of our big sinks is the ocean. So the more that the ocean absorbs and the more acidic the ocean becomes, loss of life, loss of oxygenation in the water. So that's a big problem. But there are other problems. So plastics is a problem. Is it a direct impact on climate change? Not so much. But there's also other big things like transport, which is a CO2 emitter. There's built environment and our food supply, because we can't keep, covering landmass with cities, and we can't keep cutting down trees, and we can't keep turning trees into pasture land for cattle, because those natural ecosystems are required to help us pull this stuff back out of the atmosphere. If they're not there, they're just not going to work. So, and then I would say the last big problem is humanity itself. Humanity has to take action to reduce what it's doing in terms of consumption of anything, food, clothes, housing, whatever. And human behaviour tends not to get to that point until it's critical. The problem with climate change is it's already critical. We're just not acutely aware of it.
Often we see in the news things about coal, oil, gas, renewables for our power consumption, which is a big part of our footprint, I guess. Is there any good news on the horizon around how we consume power, how we generate power? Or are we just on a nasty track at the moment?
Well, look, I think we're on a nasty track. If you look even at Australia, so Australia has had the highest uptake of rooftop solar in the world. Mm-hmm. So we're the first people in the world to experience the issues of how do you connect mass amounts of renewable energy into a grid that was never designed to take it. So even with all of that solar that's been installed, our grid consumption is still tracking at the same level or slightly higher every year. It goes up by about 1% every year. So, you can't keep building out infrastructure and renewable energy for an ever-increasing demand for energy, you've got to somehow curb demand. And I do think that there's new technology being developed all the time. I was looking the other day at iron air batteries, and they're now doing depleted nuclear and diamond battery cells and all this kind of stuff. They will come into play at some point in the future when that technology evolves enough. Renewables will get us part of the way somewhere, but we are looking for the next thing. And ultimately, I think that next thing will be some form of nuclear, which there's plenty of research on different types of reactors and molten salt and thorium and all those kind of things moving forward. But solar solar, wind and hydro are going to be problematic, particularly as the climate changes. There's already countries that have relied on hydro generation that are now having issues with hydro because they're not getting the rainfall. So it's not a guaranteed generator of power. So that's one of the things that coal-fired, gas-fired facilities provide. They provide consistent base load when you need it, whenever you need it. So, and we still haven't cracked that, I don't believe.
Yeah, wow, that's a fairly comprehensive perspective on the future of our energy consumption. And what I hear you saying is that individually and collectively we need to reduce our demand on energy until we've got something more sustainable that we can plug into, if that makes sense.
Well, we don't think of energy as waste. So
okay.
when you throw something in the bin, it's called waste. And we know it because we can touch it, we can see it, we have to put the rubbish bin out every morning on the street. It's actually a tangible part of your life,
yes.
Right? When you leave the lights on in your room and you walk out of the room, we don't see that as waste. But the simple reality is, in Queensland, for example, every kilowatt hour of energy used from the grid is 0.81 of a kilogram into the atmosphere of CO2. Every kilowatt hour consumed from the grid is 1.5 litres of fresh water that we never get back. Like, it's a wasted resource. It's also a waste of coal, because moving forward, we will always need coal for things. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the easiest way to make steel, for example, coking coal. So if we keep using it for energy, it won't be available for anything else. So it's waste when we just leave things running that don't need to be running.
Yep. So you mentioned water there before. Is this whole thing we're dealing with now, is there water scarcity likely to be a problem moving forward, or is that something we can manage?
No, it's a problem. It's a problem now. So I was watching a documentary the other day on the declining Alps in Europe, and one of the big challenges over there, particularly in places like Switzerland, is they've got these huge ski resorts that aren't getting the snow that they used to get, therefore they're not getting the runoff of that snow when the summertime comes round. And they're also using the water that they have stored to produce fake snow for resorts, which is therefore having an impact on the environment. But then you've got people that are trying to graze cattle that don't have water, so they're helicoptering water into these high altitude farms. So water is already becoming a problem in certain parts of the world. And we're seeing that even in New Zealand. They've had changes to their rainfall patterns and that kind of stuff. So that was back to the generation of energy. They've had some of their hydro plants not working that well. Look at Australia with droughts and bushfires. So water is becoming an issue. I think potentially that's a much more solvable issue in terms of we already know how to actually take seawater and turn it into drinkable water. But again, that's going to require scale, it's going to require resource and time, energy, it's going to require a whole heap of things to happen to make that scalable at a global level. But the other problem with water, obviously, is we're polluting it.
Yeah.
We're plastics, chemicals, petrochemicals from farming. So, and I think that there's only 1% of water on the planet is drinkable water. Mm. It was a scarce resource before we began.
Wow. So what I hear you saying is that we may well solve our water scarcity problem through ingenuity, but the heating of the planet is something that is not going to be easily fixed in a hurry.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So I note in your bio that you climb waterfalls. Can you tell us how you climb a waterfall?
It's actually not that hard. You wait for it to freeze in winter.
All right.
And then you get some some specialist equipment called crampons and ice axes. And you just step up and jump on.
All right, so it's like scaling an ice wall, really, rather than a waterfall.
It's like rock climbing, only kind of easier because you never have to look for a handhold. It's in your hand all the time.
That's cool.
It is becoming more difficult as the planet warms, though, because waterfall ice tends not to be as stable as it used to be.
All right, wow.
So, and there's actually parts of the Alps in Europe where permafrost holds them together, where they're having now major landslides, and European climbers are having trouble. Their window of climbing things is getting shorter as time goes on.
Oh, okay, well there's a new sport every day. How about that? And obviously, if the planet's heating, then there's, as you say, there's going to be less ice to scale and less ice to enjoy, which is pretty sad. The other question I had was about food, because obviously, if we deforestate and there's less water, what impact does it have on our food supply? Is that significant?
Hugely significant, and it's not just a lack of things, it can be an overabundance of things, because we tend to think in climate change that, you know, everything's going to be in drought. But yes, we might get more droughts in Australia, but somewhere is going to get more typhoons. Mm-hmm. So, and a classic example of that was when we had the rain event up in North Queensland 2 years ago, when they had those big floods out of Townsville. Something like 300,000 head of cattle died in that flood.
Wow.
So that cattle would have been going to a food supply somewhere. And you can't just replace them magically overnight. It takes 3 years to get cattle back up and running, and you know, before you've got a herd that you can actually send to slaughter. So the combination of drought and flooding can have a significant impact on all of our crops, animal, as well as vegetables and fruits. So on the flip side of that, some of those crops can also be beneficial to climate change and the environment, because if we go back into regenerative agriculture and we actually start improving our soil and getting our soil absorbing carbon again and going back to natural processes, the food supply can actually be part of the solution to what we're trying to achieve. And again, one of the big things in food supply, it's like a lot of things, we've got to learn about our consumption of food. How do we reduce? I eat meat. Meat is expensive to produce in terms of our natural environment. It's something like 33 calories in for 1 calorie out. Huge amount of water, huge amount of land mass. You know, it's not, in terms of an environmental footprint, the best thing to eat. But I don't eat meat every day of the week, and I don't eat large quantities of meat. You know, 80 grams of meat is plenty, but we are so used to having big meals and, you know, as a society, and we have a lot of food waste. So we produce enough calories globally to feed the population. It's just that we waste a lot of it. You know, it ends up in going off or in landfill or whatever. And if we could actually solve part of that problem, and we could actually get our diets back on track to a natural diet, that would probably solve itself, combined with regenerative agriculture. It would become a sustainable industry, essentially.
So you were talking about waste before in terms of our footprint, our lifestyle, and this waste thing also plays out with food as well, so obviously. It's interesting, I was speaking to a conference group this week, and I was sharing the platform with Ronnie Khan from Oz Harvest, and that's a great little initiative where they actually take unused food, unwanted food that's going to go to scrap, and redistribute it to people. So, you know, we need to look for more smart ways to circularise our food and all the things that we do.
Yeah, and look, even I was reading stats the other day about packaged drinks. So everything from your colas to bottled water to, you know, all those energy drinks and stuff. And it takes 3.5 litres of water to create a litre of drink. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? You could just go to the tap and drink a litre of water, and
yes.
So, you know, it's about, part of that is about awareness of what we're consuming, and, you know, getting back to, like, fundamentally, my personal belief is that we're an animal. You know, we're an evolved animal, but we essentially are an animal. We're a carbon life form. You know, we need to go back to non-processed foods and get out of that convenience factor of just being able to walk in and buy something off the shelf and throw it straight in your mouth. which you can do with a banana, by the way.
Yes. So coming back to trees for a moment, because a lot of this food that we're producing in the world requires us to clear vast tracts of rainforest, and obviously from what you shared previously is that before we came together on this interview is that, you know, vast tracts of the Amazon are on fire, and that instead of being a carbon sink now, it's a net carbon emitter, which is kind of pretty scary. What's the story with trees? Are we just, is the rate of trees on the planet increasing or decreasing as we go forward? Has there been some turnaround in that recently? Do you have any idea?
So we gave a talk, and by we, a team from Zero Positive gave a talk down at a school on the Gold Coast yesterday. And one of the presenters was Charles Adler from EcoForce Global, who's got a goal of planting 1 billion trees worldwide. And one of the statistics he shared yesterday is that we cut down on average 3 billion trees a year, and we only put about 600 million back.
Oh, okay, wow.
So, and the beauty of trees is, and it's not just trees, it's trees and, you know, all of the flora that makes up things like a natural forest or a rainforest, is that it's not just the tree. It's what the tree does to the soil. So a lot of carbon through photosynthesis ends up directly into the soil. There's nutrient, not only nutrient in the soil, but there's also, what do they call them? What's a mushroom? Funguses.
Fungi, yeah.
Fungi in the soil that actually help move that carbon around, and they help actually make the soil healthy, and they promote, you know, life basically in the soil. And then trees also, they're discovering that trees actually impact rainfall in other ways. They release chemicals that actually help make it rain, which is why forests are so, you know, particularly rainforests are so wet. So trees bring carbon in. They also emit methane, so which is 25 times worse in global warming potential than CO2.
Wow.
However, net, when you combine trees, what they do to the soil and all the rest of it, they are a much bigger carbon sink than they are a source. Yes. So, and look, they're part of the engine that makes our environment work. They have been for years. You cut them all down. They learnt that on Easter Island. You cut off all the trees, guess what? All the people died.
Wow, so there's some paradoxes there in nature around methane and emissions. But there's a balance, and it's about getting that balance right. I can hear you saying that. What I appreciated when I was having a look at some of the material before we came on today is there was a quote there that said, if you have a plan for a year, plant rice. If you have a plan for 10 years, plant a tree. But if your plan is more than 10 years, then you need to educate a child. Yeah. And that brings me to my next question, is about education and how does solar schools make a difference to schools and to students?
Look, I think the key for solar schools is it's about visualising things that you can't visualise. Mm-hmm. So we talk about energy and energy use, and we put numbers out there like a watt or a watt hour or kilowatt hour or megawatt hour. But conceptually, they're hard things to know what that is. What does that mean? And the beauty of actually what we've done with solar schools is we visualise your energy consumption from its source, solar from the grid. We turn that into amounts for your CO2, so you know how much CO2 you're emitting or avoiding. And then that can be taken directly into a classroom. And part of that aim is to actually inspire. It's partly twofold. One, it's to create behavioural change, to create a direct link between our consumption behaviour and its impact on our environment. So consume less, our environment is better. But the other thing is also to inspire kids to take on a challenge and to take on a problem, and not sit there and think they can't do anything, because we all can. Like, it's easy to turn a light switch off. You know, it's easy to turn things off when you leave the room, if that's the culture of what you've grown up with. And it's also great to see stories. I was talking to a principal of a school up north a while back, and his son's now gone to university, and through what he's learned about energy at school, his son's now got a mission to create a small-scale, home-sized nuclear reactor for your house. Now, I don't know if that's fundamentally a safe idea or not, but it seems like a really cool idea. And you know, if we can inspire a couple of like these minds to take this challenge up and go, you know, what is the next thing for energy? How are we going to solve this problem? then it might spark the kid that actually comes up with the thing that saves the human race.
Yeah, and if the listeners haven't seen the Planet Watch software and really the cool visuals that come with the program that you put out to the schools, it's really impressive. And I might even on the slide just put up some of the visuals of this. But what I really was impressed by is that if the kids in the school make a difference to their behaviour, it shows up in the data, and then it shows up in the visuals, and then you've got these little models of schools which are like little planets, and they have different colours and different ecosystems, and it kind of gives a real world picture of what's happening at that school, and then the kids can actually compare how healthy their school is relative to another school. And I think that's really clever. Do you find the kids tend to compare themselves with other schools?
Yeah, we actually have. We just had that's why I was late. I just had a student on the phone that found he didn't know, but he found his primary school on solar schools, and he was looking at it, and he's now going to a high school, and he's been in an accelerated academic program, and he has to write a report for the school as part of getting into this learning program. And so he asked the school if they had a sustainability report, and they don't. They don't have a sustainability plan. So he then went and looked for them on solar schools, and he found the school, but the metering's not there anymore. So he started asking questions about, how much energy do they use, and what does it mean? And so he's now looking at his old primary school compared to what he's seeing where he's going in his new high school.
Yeah.
And obviously, they're chalk and cheese in terms of energy consumption. But we do see kids that start, they don't even really know what they're looking at when they first pick it up, and they start realising it's a school, and then they go and search for their school and go, well, how come our school's not as good looking as that school over there? And what does this mean? And that's a win for us. Like, it's a win for seeing people engage with things, and even simple things. At the talk yesterday, I took a big balloon to the talk, and the balloon represents a kilo of volume of CO2, and it's just interesting with a grade 6 class what they thought the volume was, and it ranged between 6 tons and X number of tons, and they were shocked to learn it was only a kilo. So it's good to see that those visuals actually create meaning that kids can interpret, and then go, okay, if I go and do this, my planet looks better. How do I keep doing that over time to make my planet look better? And if they can, because they're having to take action in the real world to make the interface change in the digital world, it creates behaviour change.
Yeah, and I think you shared with me previously that in terms of impact on the atmosphere and carbon emissions, that schools as a group or as a sector of society, they may have a significant footprint relative to industry and other forms of organisations. Is that true?
Here's the shocker.
Okay.
So I did these numbers the other day based on a sample of schools that we had that have all had solar treatment. Okay. So they've all had significant amounts of solar put on them, and they vary in size. So they're really big to small. And I extrapolated that out across all schools in Australia. So there's 9,542 schools in Australia.
Wow.
There's only 6,500 service stations. There's only 994 Woolies.
Ah, okay.
Right, so just in volume, they're a big, like in terms of facilities, there's lots of them.
Big emitter, yeah.
Yeah. Schools, the first thing I would say in schools is it's education. So schools have a role to educate in all the standard things we have done for 100 years. Part of that education now needs to include authentic conversation about climate change, about the truth about energy sources and renewables and the impact of each of them, because there's no perfect solution in anything we do. Every technology or everything that we create in this space has some impact. What we're looking for is the one that has the least. And then look at what you can do in terms of regenerating agriculture. Now, unfortunately in schools, there's no central curricular government-based resource to help you with this. So, which is why we started Zero Positive. So, using platforms like Solar Schools and Zero Positive to get schools to go to net zero, to help teachers actually integrate this education into what they do in their everyday teaching life, creates change, and to actually set goals and targets. You know, one of the foundation principles of net zero is that every school that joins has to commit to the UN's Climate Neutral Now program. And that's a commitment to get yourself to net zero. Doesn't mean you have to do it tomorrow, but you have to actually start putting plans and actions in place to get you to net zero. And that's why we're here to help.
Can you tell us a little bit about the incentives for community, schools, the various stakeholders in that zero positive environment?
So in Zero Positive, as I said, we're brand new. We're actually now looking for our foundation partner schools. And the way I like to phrase that is we need them as much as they need us. So we've got learnings to take away from them, and hopefully we've got teachings to provide. One of the benefits of being in that foundation group is to be seen as a leader. And one of our partners in the program is a leading edge advertising agency called Rumble, and the schools that are our foundation partner schools will get the exposure and the media on launch dates and all that kind of stuff. And then the other things that we have for community, we're actually partnered, which might seem a little bit weird in the climate space, but we're actually partnered with an energy retailer called Radian, and what they have done is they've put together a net zero product for the residential market. So every piece of energy that you buy through that product is abated, so through tree planting regimes in WA, New South Wales, and some carbon credits from the UN.
Cool.
And it allows a school community to participate in the program by getting net zero power for a start. And if they sign up with Radian, then Radian will donate funds to their school, their nominated school, to help cover the cost of doing some of this work. So we've got those things. And then directly in solar schools, we have our MEM programs, which is an ARENA-funded grant to help cover the cost of the metering. So your average school can get into that program for about $1,000 for 3 years.
Wow.
But we've only got about 150 of those left, I think.
Okay. So if people are interested in getting their school metered and understanding their energy consumption, educating their students and their community about how they can make a real difference, they need to get onto it pretty quick if they want to take advantage of that funding. Yeah. Terrific. And who do they contact? How do they make contact for that?
The easiest way for the MEM is to go to www.solarschools.net and go to the contact form and just request some information. And the same thing for Zero Positive, zeropositive.org. Explains the program there very briefly, and someone like myself will get back to them.
Oh, fantastic. So to just make sure I'm right here, with the Zero Positive initiative, that's looking at the whole community. So if you had a parent body that's interested in fundraising to support things in the school, obviously getting the parent community on board with Radian would be a positive fundraising activity for the school. So the school would benefit financially, and also obviously from a marketing point of view, being a foundation school, the school would have all that extra airplay and be seen to be an ethical provider of education. That sounds really very positive.
And be a leader. Like our key thing for those schools is to be leaders in this space. And you know, the goal, like I said, the goal of Zero Positive is 9,542 schools in this country are net zero.
Yes.
And doing that through a range of initiatives like reducing, educating, and abating and offsetting.
I encourage people listening in, if you're a school or you're a parent body and you're wanting to make a difference to your child's education and to the planet, then reach out to Rob and his team at Solar Schools and Zero Positive and start the conversation happening in your community. Thank you, Rob, for coming on the program today and helping to create a brighter future. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you have a big idea that helps create a brighter future and would like to be part of the program, please get in touch with me via my website, thestrategyguy.com.au. And finally, Rob, once again, a big thank you to you today for coming in and sharing.
My pleasure. Okay. I'm just happy that what was the word I was? Interesting.
You are interesting.
I'm interesting.
You're very interesting.